So Underrail walked into a bar. The Hall of Judgment. Do you want to know what the judges had to say? Well, stay a while and listen. If by some strange statistical anomaly you happen to know this channel but not NeverKnowsBest, go and check him out immediately. He does more or less what I do, only he actually knows what he's talking about. In his Ultimate CRPG guide, which you should definitely check out, he touches upon what I think are the two major themes in the world of CRPGs and their most representative games. Yep, those two games that still cast long shadows over every other game that has come out in their ballparks ever since. I'm talking about the themes of medieval fantasy and post-apocalypse, and of course, about Baldur's Gate 2 and Fallout, respectively. Curse those damn games. They just ruined everything for decades to come because they were just so damn awesome.
They actually consider us gods.
But it seems that for every timeless classic that defined a genre, there's a legit spiritual successor that reignited the flame. And to me, when it comes to Baldur's Gate 2 and Fallout, those games are Pillars of Eternity and Underrail. But I think these two games went on about the whole reigniting business in a completely different way. Pillars of Eternity seems to have been dead set on ticking all the boxes of everything that turned Baldur's Gate 2 into a classic, to appeal to those who had been craving for more like Baldur's Gate 2 for 15 years. And I would say it was successful. Not perfect, of course, but successful. At least to me. But Underrail decided to take on a different approach. Here's a thought from commenter Andrew H. There's a fine line between ripping off and building on in game development. Truer words were never spoken, and Underrail is the best example of the latter in my opinion. NeverKnowsBest loved it apparently.
Next up, the award for Best Spiritual Successor to Fallout, which goes to... I don't know. I guess that's why this isn't a real award show, but really this one is harder. Of the three contenders, Underrail is my favourite, and in many ways I think the best.
Good boy.
But he also said he would think long and hard before recommending this title to any hardcore Wasteland or Fallout fan.
But it also has the least in common with Fallout, and is the hardest to recommend to other players.
And I get it, I totally do. Some people are only happy when they get an unadulterated copycat. But let me ask you this. Why do people who love westerns worship Star Wars: A New Hope?
Because it was fucking awesome and it appeals to a lot of people, not just Western fans.
Yes, but there's more to it than that, isn't it? There is a reason why someone made a top 10 list of westerns and Star Wars was his top pick. And it wasn't me, I swear. There is also a reason why stuff like this makes sense. Why do you think some people who are into metal like Tattoo's presentation in St. Petersburg, especially the first 10 minutes or so?
Because one of them was half naked all the way through?
Fuck off, troll. No, it's because the people behind the wheel dared to grab the principles of something awesome and use it as an influence rather than merely copycatting it. Western films were, of course, not the only ingredient that was distilled into the film Star Wars: A New Hope. There was some feudal Japan and old samurai stuff thrown into that stew, a generous serving of Isaac Asimov, and several tablespoons of other goody stuff. Tattoo's brand of mixing and the prevalent role of guitars is very metal, even if there's dance, pop, techno, and lots of cheap marketing that hinges on fake lesbianism. But that is what Underrail is in a nutshell.
Fake lesbianism?
No, a game that builds upon the Fallout legacy, but goes its own way to deliver its own brand of post-apocalyptic turn-based RPGing, where there are bits of X-Files, Alien, The Running Man, and Blade Runner floating about in the stew. And Alex is here to serve you a bowl, fool. To serve you a bowl, fool. Welcome to Ye Olde Entertainment. My name is Alex, and as you know, it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumping for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today, we have a title that is incredibly divisive for a game so underground. Is this one of the best CRPGs ever created? Does it ultimately suck? Or is the truth, as it is often the case, somewhere in between? Well, let's find out, shall we? As you know, I rate games according to a system of categories that I think are relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And this time we have an isometric CRPG with turn-based combat that takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting. And when it comes to those, character creation and character progression are up first. It's straight out
amazing.
And let's see why. Repeat after me, boys and girls. A character creation system is only as good as the freedom it gives the player to experiment the game in his or her own terms. And Underrail's character creation and leveling system abso-fucking-lutely nails it. See, this game has combat, exploration, puzzle solving, and questing, and the way you go on about all of these things greatly depends on your character's build. On the combat end of things, you can build your character to be a size specialist, a deadeye shooter, a melee savage, or a mad chemist, amongst many, oh so many other things. And the best thing about this variety of builds is that it translates very efficiently into different potential experiences combat-wise. Because if you played Underrail the first time as, say, a Deadeye Sniper, and now you've decided to play it again as a gun-wielding mad chemist, you'll have to come up with a completely different strategy and completely different tactics for this second playthrough. But the best part is that, as a mad chemist, you will also likely have a very different experience in other aspects of the game, such as exploration and even questing. You'll probably be able to craft dynamite earlier on in the game, and open up paths that weren't available to you the first time or that became available at a later stage. Your character's build in this game does not only depend on your attributes, your skills, and the items you equip. Crafting in this game is important, and having crafting talents that synergize with your combat capabilities goes a long way in this game. And when you finally see your skills and the gear that you have crafted working together in beautiful tactical harmony to bring your strategic design to fruition, the feeling of satisfaction is just too damn high. Underrail's character creation system is not very complicated, there aren't too many variables, and what every attribute, skill, and feat does is clearly explained. But these seemingly limited options work like Lego pieces that you can put together in an almost infinite number of ways. And it's all masterfully balanced in my opinion. Having high levels of intelligence does not automatically mean you are going to suck in combat. And similarly, on the questing end of things, being extremely dexterous or agile, but not very smart, does not mean that you have to forego those quests for which the suggested approach requires intelligence or persuasion. Sneaking about, pickpocketing, and lockpicking are also very viable alternatives to talking everyone's ears off or beating the crap out of everybody in this game. But my favorite thing about Underrail's character creation system has to be the synergies. For example, if you have high levels of intelligence, you might want to throw in a few points into electronics. This will allow you to craft better psi headbands, which will in turn dramatically improve your psi talents, which also benefit from the intelligence attribute. But if you decide to be smart in this game, as you are in real life if you are a subscriber to this channel, that'll probably come at the cost of being feeble and clumsy. But being smart also means that you can easily become an expert in biology, for example. And if you exploit this potential, it'll be easier for you to craft medicine and drugs that will help you balance things out. And I absolutely love this. You know what's the best sign that a game's character creation and leveling system is good? The fact that you are looking forward to leveling, that you relish the prospect of getting new skill points and feats. And you get a shitload of points in Underrail every time you level, but that does not mean that you take huge strides and become OP instantly, or that you can overcome your character's weaknesses overnight as it happens in Encased. There is a lot of opportunity cost going on in Underrail. Actually, I would say this is the one thing that makes this character creation system awesome. In this game you cannot, I repeat, you cannot become an expert in everything. You cannot stand before this door and say, you know what? I have been cultivating persuasion and intelligence, but I don't feel like convincing this guy. I feel more like sneaking into his room and pickpocketing the quest item off of him. That shit's not gonna work, friend. And you can't simply adventure for 30 more minutes, level up, and instantly become an ace thief, as you can in Encased, because this game takes its character creation seriously. You cannot see, experience, or take advantage of everything the game has to offer in one run. You commit to something, you build a strength, and then you try to rely on it as much as you can. You know, you make your plans based on the most basic SWOT analysis. But that doesn't mean that you are doomed to suck at something just because you didn't initially commit to it. You can course correct in this game. For example, halfway through the game during my first playthrough, I came to the realization that I was not taking full advantage of my build, because I sucked at throwing. So I dropped a few points into the throwing talent for a few levels, and by the time I hit the expansion content, bump throwing was a solid part of my offensive repertoire. I didn't become a throwing expert, of course, but I also didn't need to. But if you don't like the prospect of missing out on content and experiences that are meant for those who took the time to go down a certain path, if you don't like the prospect of not being able to respec, or not having a secondary build, or some other similar pussy Blizzard bullshit,
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
I just think you came to the wrong neighborhood, and Underrail may not be to your liking. I personally find Underrail endlessly rewarding. Crushing a combat encounter or cruising through a quest because your build is optimized for that particular challenge is rewarding. Outthinking your way around obstacles for which your build is not the most efficient is rewarding. And even playing the game again and doing all those things you couldn't do on your first run because you didn't have the appropriate talents or simply because you chose to do something else is rewarding. And the game's character creation and leveling system is where the magic happens. And if you have the Expedition DLC, just when you think Underrail's leveling system has shown all of its cards, boom, you hit level 15 and specializations become available to you. And this new character building feature comes just at the right time, because it does take a little bit of time and effort for you to figure out your tactics and the most efficient actions to take in every situation in this game. And you will probably have attained this type of maturity by the time you hit level 15. And I bet you'll have zero doubts about which specialty to go for first when you see this screen for the first time. You also have feats, which are a bit like the perks you had in the original Fallout. You can use them to mitigate some of your character's weaknesses or to further tune your character to your preferred approach. You'll notice many similarities and many differences between Underrail's character creation screen and the one in the original Fallout, but I think the overall approach to character creation in Underrail nails the principles of Fallout's system and it gives it its own juicy spin. You don't have backgrounds to choose from in Underrail as you do in Fallout. And while your background wasn't super important when it came to the gameplay itself in the original Fallout, it made a world of difference to get you hooked up and immersed in the game's premise and the part you had to play in the story. And Underrail suffers a little bit for not having this feature, and I'll talk about why later. Also, you'll have to forgive me for being a really nitpicky bastard here, but you have portraits in this game, and they feel a tad too cartoony compared to the rest of the art in the game. But the real problem with them is that none of these portraits are unique to your character, so you will be seeing other people with your exact same face throughout the game. For me, this is just a minor detail, but I know for some people, this is a serious problem. Nitpicks aside, Underrail's character creation and leveling system is one of the smartest, most useful, and most exciting systems in the CRPG ballpark. Gameplay. You have your typical mix of combat, exploration, and questing in this game, but puzzle solving and crafting are also very important in Underrail. And the game has amazing stuff for you to sink your teeth into in all these departments. And when it's firing on all cylinders, Underrail is a top tier game in all of these respects. The problem is though, that it is not firing on all cylinders at all times. Sometimes it's just straight out I had a music production professor once who said, let's say you have 10 songs ready for your upcoming album. This is what you do. You put your catchiest track at the beginning of the album, the one you consider to be the best composed at the end, and you save the next in quality for the middle of the album. Well, if Underrail had been an album, it would have failed spectacularly. The initial and final stretches of the game are the worst part of Underrail in my opinion, except the final boss battle. That one's the best boss fight in the history of CRPGs, unless you have some uberly optimized OP build that makes you bypass the tactical challenge altogether, but we'll get to that later. Narratively, this game is built around the mystery of the Faceless. These are anthropomorphic beings who seem all hell-bent on destroying the Underrail. Who they are, what they want specifically, or the reasons why they are bringing death to the peoples of the Underrail are completely unknown for a fairly large chunk of the game. But there are a few political/military groups and even private corporations who are interested in figuring this out for their own gain or to put an end to it. One such group is the Southgate Station, and you are their latest newbie recruit, the guy or gal who will of course eventually become instrumental in averting this world-ending threat. And you start as the lowly noob who must prove himself before the one big thing that makes your superiors decide that you are the right person for the job happens. And while this seems reasonable enough, it's
not a great plan.
Not a great plan at all narratively, definitely not for a video game. See, in the original Fallout, right out of the gate, you've been entrusted with a task that is a matter of life or death to you and your people. Why you and not somebody else? You see, therein lies the importance of backgrounds for your character. You only need to read Albert's or Natalia's bio sheet for it to become obvious why this dude has chosen you to go out and search for the water chip and not anyone else. But backgrounds aren't the only way to get the player invested in what's going on early in the game. In Shadowrun Hong Kong, you get a letter from your father asking for your help with something highly confidential and dangerous, and he cannot tell you more about it. This introduction is lean and to the point. Just a few words suffice to make it abundantly clear that you didn't leave things in the best state when you parted ways with your foster dad. It is also evident that whatever is going on must indeed be very serious if he is asking for your help. See, in both of these cases, there's a personal stake, something important or at least potentially important to your character. And it doesn't need to be the one thing that threatens to end it all. As a developer, you can tie in that stuff later on in the game, but you need a personal stake to get things rolling. But there is nothing of that going on in Underrail. The game starts with a clunky tutorial, and shortly after that, you're given a series of lowly missions and fetch quests that you have no personal stakes in. And it doesn't help that some of these quests involve navigating a series of empty locations that aren't much to look at. And one of these quests is even the most tedious and irritating mission in the entire game. You are also treated very early on to Underrail's particular brand of combat, which is more a test to your tactical skill than it is to your character building skill. This means that you have to figure out every fight as though it were a puzzle, and it also means that, as it happens with puzzles, sometimes it'll take more than one attempt. And to some people this may come off as incredibly save scummy. It doesn't personally bother me though. After playing all those adventure games by Sierra in the mid-80s, I grew immune to save scumminess induced hatred, but I can safely predict some of you aren't going to love it. Also, figuring out how to reload a weapon and how to equip and use tools, finding out how to access those skills you've just learned, figuring out how trading and crafting work, these things aren't exactly user-friendly in Underrail, and this does not help to ease up the player to what's to come. But we'll talk about that later, of course. Also, the game lets you know from the get-go that it isn't fucking around with its difficulty. Every enemy in this game has its own unique plan to grind you to dust, and most of them are a lot better equipped to do so than you are to defend yourself. You know these exercise training programs that start with easy exercises and short routines, and they progressively get harder and longer? Okay, yes, laugh it out. Go ahead. You know what I mean, dude. Well, Underrail is nothing like that. It's out to crush you from the get-go. Things get a little bit more interesting when you arrive at a location known as the Junkyard. This is a community that has rival factions with totalitarian aspirations, a la mafia families. It has its own problems, its fair share of vendors with unique stuff, and things and people that need killing. It still doesn't feel like any of that is any of your business, but it makes the things you have to do feel a little bit more important. I will admit that I was this close to quitting Underrail, more or less around this time. I'll give it a couple more hours, I said, without much hope or conviction. But like the head of the Survivor says,
endure, and you will be victorious.
And that's what I did, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made about a game. Because after these guys show up, the game starts to get progressively more badass, intriguing, and immersive, until it becomes a wild ride of high stakes and awesome shit that goes from futuristic gladiator arena combat a la Tron Legacy, to brutal TV shows a la The Running Man, to thrilling espionage, to X-Files inspired mysteries. Combat is turn-based in Underrail, and it is super challenging, but defeating a group of enemies in this game brings a tremendous feeling of satisfaction. It's the satisfaction of successfully outthinking the bad guys, the satisfaction of learning new tactics and tricks from your enemies that you can later use to your advantage, or the satisfaction of getting that piece of badass loot you so lustily craved. The enemy AI in this game is one of the best I've ever seen. Enemies in this game play to their strengths. They are aware of their combat synergies as a group and make the most out of them. They use complex tactics, they try to exploit your weaknesses, they use the resources cleverly. In short, they are pretty fucking impressive.
The Solarians like their wars won before they start.
If there are any Solarians watching this video,
I'm betting on unlikely.
Well, anyhow, if you are a Solarian, you should know that maybe this game isn't for you. Some RPGs are designed in ways that allow your build to do the heavy lifting for you during combat encounters, which means that you more or less win fights before they start, Solarian style. So the only thing that's left for you to do during the combat encounter itself is to buff appropriately, inspect the enemy and choose the spell that undoes its immunity, and use basic by-the-book tactics like tank and spank. But combat in Underrail is as much about the decisions you make during the combat encounter per se, as it is about your character's build. I have read many negative comments from people who rage quit Underrail after their encounter with the mutants at the Junkyard Depot. Some of these people go back to square one and create a new character with a different build and end up getting their asses kicked all the same. And some others end up easily trouncing the mutants with their new build, only to become frustrated later on in the game when they face a challenge for which their build is not efficient. And the conclusion they draw is that builds do not work in the game. But I think these people do not understand what combat is about in Underrail. They keep trying to fix their problems by going back to the character creation screen and coming up with a new build, when in truth, that may only be a part of the problem. Hell, it may not be the problem at all. I think these people would do well to just reload and try to do things differently. Maybe find a different way to access the location in which the combat they're having trouble with takes place. That's where and how the fun is to be had in Underrail. Builds are important in Underrail as they are in every RPG, but they are not the only important thing. I don't even think they are the most important thing. The sooner you understand this game isn't about coming up with a godly build that makes the game easy, and the sooner you accept that fights are meant to be like puzzles, and that saving and reloading is as much a part of the game as it is in games that are purely tactical like Desperados 3, the sooner you'll start having fun with it. So while this game is hard, very hard at times, it is never unfair. And if you pay close attention to the combat dynamics in this game, to your enemy's go-to tactics, and if you make an honest evaluation of the efficiency of your own strategy and tactics, you will learn how to make your game plan more efficient. You will learn which skills to use depending on the enemy and which items to use in tandem with those skills. And this experience in Underrail is incomparable, friends, especially when you see your tactical plan come full circle. I hate it when you have half a gazillion trillion zillion enemy models, but their attacks are limited to melee, ranged, and damage over time, and the only variations are the types of damage they do and the type of resistances you must overcome. But I am happy to report that this is not the case with Underrail. Some enemies lay eggs that hatch and try to overwhelm you, some creep up behind you and inject you with a paralyzing toxin that triggers after 2 rounds, some give you a nasty debuff that turns healing into damage, some leave pools of acid behind them as they walk, some explode when they reach you kamikaze style, you name it. Also, don't let the simplicity of the graphics or the boxy level layout fool you. Level design is hugely relevant to the combat experience in Underrail. There are electrical spider webs that can paralyze you in a snap, exploding barrels that you can use to your advantage, ventilation shafts that you can use to escape groups of enemies, only to come around later and attack them from behind. The sheer diversity of enemies, skills, and gear and the level design provide a delicious sandboxy experience that truly allows you to approach every combat encounter your way. And it's just not combat encounters that are varied. The diversity of situations that serve as context to many of these fights is also one of the richest and most creative out there. There are exciting hold the line moments against hordes of natives that take place in isolated military facilities. There's breaking into enemy strongholds commando style with a bunch of other guys. There are frightening ghostly doppelgangers who are dead set on stopping you from reaching a mysterious crystal. There are ambushes and deals gone awry that end in battle. And this variety is something that I love to see in RPGs. In games like XCOM or Phoenix Point, or RPGs with turn-based combat like Shadowrun Hong Kong or Wasteland 3, you always know how many enemies you're up against, the type of enemy they are, and if they are taking cover and where. In Underrail, you can't see enemies or things that are not in your character's line of sight, and that is both a good and a bad thing. It can be tactically challenging and incredibly frustrating at the same time. it took me a long time to come to terms with it, and even after I did, I had a love-hate relationship with this mechanic. The worst part about it is that you won't always know how many enemies you are going to have to engage when you start the fight. Sometimes you walk into a room and see a couple of guys just standing there. Piece of cake, you think, as you pull out your guns to make short work of them. But it turns out that there's an entire room that you couldn't have known about, in which there are 3 or 4 more enemies that'll run you down easily because you just spent all your offensive juice on those 2 losers. Okay, live and learn, save and restore. Now that you know there's 4 of these guys, and not just 2, you play your cards differently. On the other hand, this design adds uncertainty to the exploration aspect of the game, and it keeps you on your toes at all times. And this feeling of uncertainty is a big part of Underrail's personality. Maybe the combat experience would have been less frustrating if it had been more akin to that of the Shadowrun series or Wasteland 3, but I think it would have definitely watered down Underrail's uniqueness. And though this game focuses very heavily on combat, it brings back one of the best things about our favorite CRPGs from the early 2000s, and it's that beating the crap out of everyone is often not the only solution, and many times it isn't even the best solution. There's this quest, for example, that requires you to track down Lubin, a former Cortec employee. Cortec is one of the big military tech corporations of the Underrail, and Lubin has gone missing along with an important military gadget known as the ICPD. After you find the dude, you learn that a gang of lowlifes from an area of the Undercity known as The Zone has stolen the ICPD from Lubin. So you can go and talk to the gang and try to bargain for the thing. You can straight out buy the ICPD from the gang and pay the full price they're asking. You can coerce or convince them to give you the ICPD for free, or you can challenge the gang leader to a fist fight. And if you decide to do this last thing, you can win the fight on a fair mano a mano, or you can cheat and bring out your guns and psi abilities. But if you do this, well, get ready to face the consequence of having to fight the entire gang. You can also sneak all the way to the gang leader and pickpocket the ICPD off of him and avoid all forms of interaction, violent or otherwise. Or you can talk to the gang, make sure the gang leader has the item, say you'll come back later with the money, then find a vantage point and kill all of them. And quests like this one are not the exception in Underrail, they are the rule. There are many ways for you to approach every quest in this game, but whether or not you stand a chance of succeeding depends on the talents and skills you have been cultivating throughout the game. Don't expect to be able to just sneak into the gang's boss's room successfully and pick the ICPD off of him if you don't have superb dexterity and keen sneaking and pickpocketing talents. Don't expect to be able to beat him on a fistfight if you're not good in a brawl. And therein lies the beauty of Underrail's combat and quest design.
There's always another way.
Yes, there are a few fetch quests here and there, and some of them follow the "get this MacGuffin for me because insert here plot convenient bullshit excuse that prevents me from getting it myself." But most of the stuff you do in Underrail is deeply imbued with the game's lore. Every quest you take on in Underrail feels like it has larger implications. Also, it's not uncommon for your mission to go tits up halfway through, so you'll often get the feeling that you are die-harding your way against unsurmountable odds. And if this is good in the core game, it gets even better in the expansion. The Expedition DLC adds the thrill of a classified mission that begins in a secluded military facility in an area known as the Black Sea. This mission takes you on an X-Files inspired journey to piece together the demise and extinction of a civilization that seems to have reached levels of technological advancement that are way beyond anything you've seen in the Underrail. And the answers to your most important questions lie in the annals of written and tacit ancestral knowledge, which is fiercely protected by the local indigenous population of the Black Sea. And these are people who know better than to mess around with mystical phenomena beyond their comprehension, unlike the people you work for. Yes, that is the level of intrigue we are talking about here, and your quests are deeply submerged in it. There is also exploration to be done in Underrail. This is what the world map looks like. And the game's level design consists of a series of rectangles and squares where there are assets masquerading as level design. Despite all of this, exploration in Underrail is deeply rewarding. This game is huge, and it is filled with areas, passageways, and shortcuts that are locked behind various different skill checks. Some areas can only be accessed if you have dynamite or a jackhammer to blow up the stone barricades that bar the way in. Some others are locked behind doors that you need to lockpick or electronic security protocols that you need to hack. And some can only be accessed if you have enough agility to jump over the obstacle that's keeping you out. I totally love that having the right level of lockpicking or hacking allows you to gain access to places that make it easier for you to ambush your enemies. In the Expedition DLC, you can also find many alternative secret entrances to some highly guarded places if you take the time to explore the area thoroughly with your jet ski. Speaking of jet skis, let's talk about those for a moment, because they are a riot. In the Expedition DLC, you have jet skis, and you'll be using those to move around the Black Sea archipelago. You can store loot in your jet ski, which I think is a super awesome feature. You can do combat while riding your jet ski, and you can even finish arguably the most important quest in the game in a unique way if you have the appropriate model of jet ski. There are also different types of jet skis, and good old Ray has just the perfect one for someone like you. Do you like to get to your destination with speed and style? Allow me to introduce you to the Torpedo, the fastest ride in the Underrail.
Chicks dig it. Rouse!
Are you a loot hoarder who also wants to finish the DLC's main quest without anyone's help? Enter the Freighter, a ride for real men. If you don't like it...
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
Tired of dealing with pesky vermin, insipid natives, and annoying pirates? Well, you can easily put all of that behind you, friend, if you allow good old Ray to interest you in the all-brutal Devastator. And these jet skis are made even more awesome by all the lore that's behind each of them. Let's talk about itemization and crafting in Underrail, because I think these features deserve a very special mention. This is probably the best itemization I've ever experienced in a CRPG, right next to Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. You can find or purchase many different schematics in Underrail. These schematics allow you to craft shots of health, energy, or adrenaline to keep you alive and kicking during a fight. But you can learn schematics with which you can create powerful explosives, interesting weapons, and gear to improve your side talents. And the quality and efficiency of the things you craft depends on your level of expertise on the corresponding discipline. For example, you can craft psi headbands to improve the efficiency of your psi talents. These psi headbands require some basic components, and if you use only the minimum required components, you'll only be able to craft a very simple headband, which may not be all that interesting because you can buy better headbands from specialized vendors in the Underrail, albeit at a very high price. But if you have a high level of electronics, you can craft a totally rad psi headband that suits your particular needs, fits right in with your tactics, and takes you to the next level of badassery as a fighter. But that is if you take the right time to gather the right add-on components. And that's why crafting in Underrail is ridiculously awesome. Let's take a deeper look into the psi headband example. But know that this same principle also applies to a ton of other items. There are, for example, modulators that greatly enhance your temporal manipulation psi skills, others that improve your neurological skills, others that make your psi skills less costly to use, because using these skills require action points and psi points, and other modulators that are universal. These modulators enhance all types of psi skills but are less powerful than specialized modulators. But this means that if you have a good enough level of electronics, you'll be able to craft the perfect psi headband for your character. A headband that you just won't be able to find in a specialized store. And I think this is beyond
amazing.
And the same thing applies to explosives. EMP grenades, for example, are super mega efficient against sentries and mechanical constructs. They do a shit ton of damage and they paralyze the enemy. And there are several tiers of power for these grenades depending on how many electromagnetic dischargers you use. The best EMP grenades require a high level of electronics and at least a few points in mechanics, but the payoff is tremendous. I like that in Underrail, the balance between the consumption of resources like grenades and mines is very well balanced with the availability of the components needed to craft these items and their prices. There's also some puzzle solving in Underrail, especially in the Expedition expansion pack. And believe me, this game does not fuck around with its puzzles. There is no way for you to brute force your way through them with trial and error. And if you are watching this and thinking, please dude, I don't need puzzle solving skills, I got Google.
I got some bad news for you, sunshine.
The toughest puzzles in this game have enough randomly generated shit for them to be uber difficult even with the entire Underrail puzzle solving community on your side. Actually, the code decryption puzzle in this game is hands down the hardest puzzle I've ever solved in any game. Any game. And I am a huge fan of the Myst series. And I am counting Myst 4 here. Yes, that's how motherfucking hard this puzzle is. Disclaimer, basic knowledge of music or Microsoft Excel may be required here. But I can't describe with words the satisfaction that I got when I saw those damn doors open. Game developers everywhere, pay attention. This is how you do puzzles in CRPGs that don't revolve around puzzle solving. Let me break down why puzzles are so good in Underrail. First, there is no pointless repetition of the same style of puzzle. Second, each puzzle is completely different from the others. Third, puzzle mechanics are very easy to understand, but the puzzles themselves are very difficult to solve. Fourth, trying a solution for a puzzle does not take 4 or 5 minutes, it takes seconds. But because there are literally infinite combinations that you can try, trial and error is not an option. Fifth, puzzles are not condensed in one act or area, they are uniformly distributed in the game. Sixth, puzzles are not mandatory, but solving them makes a world of difference. You want the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, okay. You want to get to the bottom of that X-Files inspired mystery that's keeping you awake at night in real life and has your girlfriend worrying that you might be losing your shit so much that she You want to tip the scales in your favor for that final boss encounter? You want the most badass gun in the game? Well, you have to solve those puzzles, baby. But guess what? You don't have to complete these puzzles to progress through the game if you don't want to. Oh, so you think this game does not have fast travel? Huh, how about you pay attention to the puzzle of what the world around you is telling you? Maybe that'll help. But enough about puzzles. Let's talk about the final stretch of the game, because I wasn't crazy about it. The final stretch of the game is probably amongst the worst things Underrail has to offer, unfortunately. There is, of course, a decisive moment in this game's story, a point of no return. You know what I am talking about. The lands meet, crossing the Omega 4 relay, your final encounter with Bodhi, your last conversation with your friends at the mortuary before crossing that threshold. And of course, Underrail has its own version of this. But unfortunately, the game loses momentum and the pace of the game goes off after this dramatic pivotal moment. And that's because the final stretch of the game takes place in a location that is much too big. There's just too much slow-paced shit to do. There are enemies that respawn after only a couple of minutes, when this hadn't been a thing in the game up until that point. There's a head-scratching puzzle, and even additional quests. The good news, however, is that at the end of this log, there's a neat little surprise waiting for you. I'm only talking about the best motherfucking final boss fight ever in the history of CRPGs. What I mean, before you let the demon of your hatred loose upon the comment section of this video, is that this final boss is my personal favorite. It doesn't have to be yours, we're not dealing in absolutes here.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
And you are nowhere near as cool or badass. I think this final boss encounter embodies the spirit of the game brilliantly. Combat in Underrail is challenging and the fun factor is off the charts, but it's the final boss fight that steals the show in this game. The final boss has tactical assets, and you have to evaluate what they do and how they work against your build, and therefore your plan. He has the home court advantage, of course, but if you evaluate the location, you'll see that there's an interesting thing or two there that you can use to your advantage depending on your character's build. And you know what made the difference between failing miserably and achieving glorious victory in this fight for me? Enlightenment. That's right. Once I figured out what the fight was about, and the best way for my character to approach it, I nailed it on my second attempt. The second attempt after the enlightenment occurred, that is. I must have failed 15 or 17 times before that. Yes, this is Orphan of Ko's levels of difficulty, if Bloodborne were turn-based. And that is Underrail's combat in a nutshell. But you know what is more Underrail than that? Taking the time to figure out the chemistry puzzle in the area that comes before the boss's chamber. It takes patience, time, and a shitload of effort, but if you solve that puzzle, then the final boss encounter becomes significantly easier. Underrail has its issues, it is save scummy, the initial and final stretches of the game are borderline boring, and it has a couple of quests that are annoying as fuck. But the combat is challenging for mostly all the right reasons, And because of that, the feeling of accomplishment that you get from overcoming the fights is sweet as fuck. Exploration is rewarding in every way imaginable, and the quest design is brilliant because you can always do things your way, and the game acknowledges your particular approach to every situation and rewards you appropriately, giving you more experience points if you take the long, painful road, or providing little dialogue snippets that feel like a wink, or as though the game were saying, "I know what you did last summer." And this adds tremendous replay value and immersion to the experience. Puzzles are exactly what they need to be in an RPG, even if they are harder than most puzzles in actual puzzle games. But hey, this is Underrail, and this game lives by the philosophy of
no pressure, no diamonds,
story and lore. Underrail is an isometric CRPG with turn-based combat mechanics that takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting, and it is not a Fallout clone. And for that alone, it should be given all the credit in the world, because that's a lot more than can be said of most of its cousins in the medieval fantasy ballpark. And I actually find Underrail's brand of post-apocalypse intriguing, straight out fascinating even. Underrail takes the mystery of the unexplained phenomena of X-Files, the futuristic dystopia of Blade Runner, the horrific anxiety of the original Alien film, and the cheesy concept of the televised futuristic mortal entertainment of The Running Man, and it blends it together with the overarching concept of a Fallout-esque scenario in which people try to do the best they can with what little they got, while groups who have greater economic and military power seek to benefit from the situation to further their own obscure agendas. And the game distills all of these influences into a flavor of its own, and it is very much to my liking. The world of Underrail is expansive, and as you explore its confines and talk to its people, you get the feeling that there is much more to it than meets the eye. This world does not revolve around you or your quest. It was there long before you walked into it. But what truly sets Underrail's personality apart is that it strongly relies on the overarching mysteries of its world and the big questions that come from it to deliver its own unique flavor of adventure. While in Fallout, the who's, the whys, and the hows of the apocalypse are sitting there in plain daylight for everyone to see. Because that game is not about the mystery behind the apocalypse, it's about your quest to ensure the survival of the people who live in your vault. Of course, this initial quest ends up tying into something bigger with greater stakes, but it is always your story. And that's probably why Fallout feels more personal and why its stakes feel a little higher. In Underrail, things are rarely ever about you, and you have no personal stake in anything that goes on in the world. The Gladiator Arena and the Gauntlet are the only shiny exceptions, but not the rule. And that made me feel a little bit detached from what was going on from time to time. But the writers nailed the mystery aspect of the story, in the core game as well as in the expansion pack, and that was enough to keep me invested all the way through, especially in the Expedition DLC. There is something uncomfortable about the threat of the Faceless. Yes, these beings are clearly dangerous, but you get the feeling that there are important details about them that no one is telling you. And with some groups, you get the sneaking suspicion that they don't want to tell you what they know. And in some other cases, you get the feeling that people aren't telling you more because they truly don't know jack shit. The expansion even raises questions about the world outside the Underrail. Is everything and everyone out there truly gone? Why are there different versions of what happened? Some people clearly know more than they are letting on. What aren't they telling you? Ah, the anxiety of a good old X-Files mission. Gotta love it. And this character? Best NPC ever. Well, not quite, but close. Your travels in Underrail will take you to all sorts of interesting places where there's always something going on. And the writers took great care to make the problems that are affecting each of these places feel like stuff that has not been sitting around conveniently waiting for you to show up. These problems feel real, and you always get the impression that the people affected are actively trying to solve them. There's always a conversation that you can eavesdrop on about the problem at hand, a recent failed attempt to solve the problem, or a mission in progress to take care of the issue. And that's a very subtle treatment of the problems in the game's world on behalf of the writers, and it adds a lot to the immersion aspect of the game. The Foundry is one of my favorite locations. You have a couple of quests that require creative thinking and may be resolved in many different ways. And one of them even throws the curveball of a moral dilemma at you, and they feel like real problems a mining community such as the one in the Foundry would have. I also have to give credit to the writers for their superb sense of humor. This game is funny in so many unexpected yet awesome ways that it even gave me the chills from time to time. Underrail strikes a perfect balance between levity and gravitas. Its humor never comes off as cheesy because it is restrained and opportune, and it strikes like lightning when the time is right. Underrail is a catalog of Easter eggs from the most awesome shit there is. Enemies who fire at you with guns will often say, "Say hello to my little friend!" When people whom you don't give too much of a shit about, like random drunkards and hobos, ask you your name, you can tell them, "My name is Adan." There's a part in which someone asks you why you think you're qualified for the job, and one of the answers available is, "Because killing is my business, and business is good." Like the title of that Megadeth album. And there's this guy you meet who goes by the name of The Dude. And I won't say anything more about this guy, because it'll be a crime to spoil it to you.
You know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
I'll just say this, don't let the game fool you into thinking he is just a comedic relief. There are, however, a couple of things about the story in Underrail that I wasn't personally crazy about. One of them is the game's extreme fondness of unresolved mysteries. I admit this is a very personal take. I understand this is to be expected of a game that draws heavy inspiration from shows such as The X-Files, and I understand that intrigue and lingering mysteries are as much a part of this game's personality as its Fallout influences. But I found it frustrating to no end that my character was constantly stonewalled and kept in the dark, regardless of how much effort I put into digging out the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
I was constantly denied answers by the big players in the game because I didn't need to know. My lengthy and perilous journeys into the depths of the darkest confines of the world often turned out fruitless because the knowledge I sought was beyond my comprehension, and so on and so forth. Underrail is long and hard.
And I got news for you.
Yeah. What I mean is that I put a lot of effort trying to unravel the game's mysteries, and
mild spoilers coming your way.
The most important questions about the Faceless, the object known as the Acorn, and the surface world will remain a mystery no matter how you do things or which questions you ask, and that is a bit disappointing for a game that otherwise puts you squarely in the driver's seat of the experience. On a separate note, I understand that the writers wanted to give each community in the game their own idiosyncrasy, and they absolutely should be given credit for this, but in some cases this comes off as painfully forced. I get that young people and zoners in Hardcore City refer to cool things as hardcore, and they use the word dominating when they talk about competent people or stuff that's turning out really well, but
enough is enough!
The writing per se is also a bit all over the place. Some descriptions and narrations are on point, and some of them are even impressive, but some people seem to talk and act in ways that seem inconsistent with their backgrounds or their statuses, and some people are even unreasonably forthcoming about their motivations and seem ready to tell you their darkest secrets just because you asked nicely. I think this aspect of the game improved dramatically in the Expedition DLC, but it still has its issues. Also, because the story was never my character's story, I ended up not giving too much of a shit about anyone in this game aside from the dude and maybe the muties in the Black Sea. Overall, though the game starts slow, the story in Underrail is solid and immersive. The mystery aspect of the game might have been taken a little bit too far, but it's still very much worth the price of the admission. The DLC is where the game truly shines in the writing department, so it gets extra points for that. Companions lore-wise,
there aren't any!
But would Underrail have been better if there had been a sidekick or two tagging along for the ride? Absolutely not. This one is 100% meant to be a solo deal, and I think it is perfect as it is. And take it from someone who thinks companions in RPGs are so important that they deserve their own category in a review. Two, actually. Speaking of which, companions gameplay-wise.
There aren't any!
Secondary mechanics and user experience. In addition to its core gameplay, Underrail has crafting, which we have already talked about extensively. And it also has trading and interior decoration. Yeah, we'll get to that. I think the devs nailed the economy aspect of the game. You may find ways to abuse it, but it's not easy. In most RPGs, you just pick every location clean of loot, you go back to town, and you sell all your shit to a vendor regardless of the type of business he or she is running. And most of the time they have an infinite amount of money to buy your stuff. I see you sell magic potions, my good man. Well, here's a shitload of crude iron ore and broken swords that I need to dispose of. Now kindly give me all the gold you can spare. That's trading in most CRPGs in a nutshell. Some games go a little bit out of their way to change the value of an item depending on the vendor you are selling it to, and some give vendors a limited budget for purchases, but that's about it. In Underrail, vendors are only interested in items that are relevant to their business. Weapon dealers will only buy ammo shells, and guns, and only as many as they need. You want to sell those 23 submachine guns you hoarded during your last raid on an enemy stronghold? Tough luck, man, I'm only interested in 3. They also run out of cash regularly, and some will only take your currency at a very bad rate. I felt like that was a nice way to balance out the economy in this game. I found myself always assessing the price of each individual gun I had to make the most out of my next trip to the weapon store. In Underrail, you get a house for free if you do the right jobs for the right people. And if you handle your finances decently, you can even pimp your crib with furniture, paint jobs, and storage space. And all that is completely pointless in this game. Why? Well, because you just don't need any of that shit. Resting to regain your health? That's not a thing in this game. Workbenches to do stuff? Nope, don't need any of that. You do all those things on the fly. Well then, maybe having a trunk to store spare gear and components would be nice. Yes, but your house is not the best place to have those either. Actually, this is what I did. See this little plaza here? These are some of the most important stores in the Undercity. See this barrel here? Well, I claimed it as my stash for the rest of the game, because no one ever looks into barrels or steals stuff from them. Your house really only serves one practical purpose, but telling you about it would be spoiling one of the game's puzzles, so you won't know until you play the game. Let's talk about the user experience in Underrail. UX is not great in this game. Actually, it kinda sucks. Quality of life features must never be confused with hand-holdiness. These are two different things. Underrail doesn't hold your hand, and I very much approve of this. That's what makes this game awesome. But it also offers few quality of life features, and that's just not good. For example, you can't compare items in this game. And regardless of how different your weapons may all be in terms of their efficiency against this or that type of enemy, or the action points required to use them, you may still want to make a quick comparison to decide which weapon to take with you. When your inventory screen and a container are opened at the same time, you can't shift click or control click to transfer items. You have to drag and drop each item or transfer all of them. When you open up the crafting menu, you get a very thin yellow circle that is supposed to highlight the components that you need for the selected recipe. Just compare this to the crafting system in Encased. You choose your recipe, and if you possess all the required components, the game will show them in the crafting interface.
But Alex, the crafting system in Underrail is way more complicated and way richer than the one in Encased. Like you mentioned earlier, Psi headbands, for example, may be crafted with just the basic components, or with several different combinations of modules.
Yes, but what if I told you that you could have done something like this? That sounds about right to you, troll? When I learned my first skills, I didn't know where the fuck to find them. It's here, by the way. What the hell even is that? Also, know that some jet skis have skills, and you also find them here. That took me a while to figure. In this part of the game, I didn't know how to operate this robot, because the information on how to use devices that perform more than one function wasn't presented at the appropriate time. Combat user experience is also more complicated than it needed to be. It took me quite a while to figure out how to plan my actions around my pool of remaining action points and side points, because the game didn't present this information in a clear way. Also, what is wrong with the tried and true formula of differently colored squares that tell you how far you can walk before your selected skill becomes unusable? This little bullshit line?
Not a great plan.
The sprint talent, which is a lifesaver in this game, adds movement points. But you can't rightly tell if using this skill at a given time will be enough for you to reach that corner you so desperately need to get out of an enemy's line of sight. It would have been great if you had gotten that information by simply hovering over the skill and getting the typical colored squares or hexagons. Stealth mechanics could have also been much better. You don't get any information about how visible you are to the enemies when you are in stealth mode. I couldn't even rightly tell if the direction in which they were looking made any difference, and that makes the lives of those who are into sneaking significantly more difficult. And it adds to the game's already safe scummy nature. The world map in Underrail is really useful and simple to use, once you know how it works. The problem is getting to know how it works in the first place. Man, this shit is counterintuitive as fuck. And know that this microscopic orange line, yes, that's how you know where you're at, and that took me a while to figure. Don't get me wrong, Underrail is not specially clunky, it's just that the learning curve is steeper than it needed to be because some of its mechanics could have been leaner and a lot more intuitive. Sound effects and mix. This is a hell of a mixed bag. Some sounds are laughably bad, like the neural overload skill, or the gun sounds, but some others are pretty decent, like the sound of your temporal distortion and psychotemporal dilation skills. There are volume issues here and there, and the sonic landscape of the game is painfully lacking. Hardcore City is meant to be a loud and busy place, and the Foundry is supposed to be a mining town where there's heavy machinery and forges. And while there is some ambient sound, I'd say it's the bare minimum. Overall, sound effects and mix are definitely not Underrail's strong suits. Music. You know what? They actually nailed it with the music. The moral of the story here is that if you know what you are going for on the artistic end of things, there's always a way to push it through. The score in Underrail nails the vibe of every location and passage. Dark caves feel terrifying because of the music. The Black Sea feels mysterious and dangerous because of the music. I would absolutely say the music fills in the gap left by the sound. The game's score consists 100% of synthesized instruments and sounds. Not exactly award-winning stuff, but it fits the game like a glove. I do miss some of the epic wow factor we get from music in games with a higher budget, but it's alright. If I had to describe the soundtrack with one word, I would say it is smart. Voice acting.
There ain't any.
Does the game need it? Nope, it's perfectly fine as it is. Graphics. As it happened with the music, the devs went with an unpretentious concept that goes with the game's vibes perfectly. Suburbs feel adequately dystopian, caves and sewers feel dangerous, and ruins feel like they are a part of a world that's been long forgotten. There's a surprising amount of detail in these locations that make them feel creepy, abandoned, suburban, or rich depending on the case. Now, I know that in isometric CRPGs, the worlds we navigate are made up of a series of squares and rectangles. But in most of these games, these squares and rectangles are carefully disguised with assets that give it some semblance of geography and topography. Not in Underrail though. The world in this game feels a little too much like a series of boxes, and the map display only makes the world design feel even boxier. But I think the developers were well aware of their limitations and they didn't bite off more than they could chew. That's why nothing in Underrail feels like it's terribly out of place or undercooked, or like a straight out failure. Like some of the stuff you see in Solasta Crown of the Magister or Expeditions Rome, for example. Weapons and items are quite detailed and consistent with the game's concept, and most of them are easy to differentiate in the sea of items that you'll be gathering over the course of this game. Animations are not fancy, but they are serviceable. Do take into consideration, though, that this game is a budget title, and therefore it does not have AAA or AA production values, but I suspect you've already figured that out watching this video. Performance and stability. For a game as long as this one, that was made by 5 dudes, this game runs incredibly smoothly. You do have to fiddle around a bit with the installation, but once you get it up and running, it's smoother than your panties.
And I got news for you.
I experienced no crashes at all, no bugs or glitches, or any severe frame drops of any kind. And I think that is very, very impressive indeed. Other considerations and final thoughts. Underrail walked into the Hall of Judgment, where the 3 magistrates awaited.
I judge you worthy,
spoke the first one.
For though some truths may always be beyond our grasp, one must always strive to reach them. Such is the way of enlightenment. Such is the road you've traveled. I judge you worthy,
spoke the second judge.
For humanity is its own worst enemy, and that is why we must care about it and seek the truth behind its harmful actions. That is how we succeed as a species.
I judge you worthy,
spoke the third judge.
For everything the other two said. Plus you nailed the principles of what turned me into a timeless classic without being a carbon copy of me. And that is truly awesome. The gates of Elysium are open to you, Underrail. You may enter.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.